I watched my wife declare my affection as toxic patriarchy and turn me into the enemy. I moved out emotionally and forced a lesson in consequences. But I never expected my wife to transform into a walking gender studies textbook, who treated our bedroom like a battlefield against the patriarchy. It started about 3 months ago. I came home from work, ready to spend time with the woman I'd been married to for 4 years, and she hit me with this bombshell. I've been doing some reading about patriarchal structures and relationships, and I think we need to talk. I should have seen the red flags right there, the way she said patriarchal structures like she was delivering a lecture, the stack of books on our coffee table with titles I couldn't even pronounce, the sudden shift from the woman who used to greet me with a kiss to someone who looked at me like I was a case study. "Okay," I said, setting down my keys. "What's on your mind?" She launched into this 15-minute speech about how traditional marriage roles were designed to oppress women, how physical intimacy was often just another form of male dominance, and how she was reclaiming her agency. I stood there trying to process what I was hearing, wondering if my wife had been replaced by some activist robot. "So, what exactly are you saying?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I'm saying that I refuse to participate in patriarchal oppression anymore, starting with our physical relationship. Let me paint you a picture here. This is the same woman who, 6 months earlier, had initiated intimacy more often than I did. The same woman who used to complain when I worked late because she missed me. Now she's telling me that our entire relationship was apparently some elaborate scheme to keep her down. You're telling me that when we're together, I'm oppressing you?" I asked, genuinely trying to understand her logic. "It's not personal," she said, like she was explaining basic math to a child. "It's systemic. The expectation that women should be available for male pleasure whenever men want is a cornerstone of patriarchal control." I felt something shift inside me, but not in the way she probably expected. It wasn't guilt or shame. It was clarity, crystal clear, clarity that I was dealing with someone who had decided to view our entire marriage through the lens of oppression politics. "When have I ever expected you to be available whenever I want?" I asked. "When have I ever pressured you or made you feel like you had to do anything?" She started rattling off statistics about marital coercion and something called coercive consent that she'd learned from her new online feminist group. I realized I wasn't talking to my wife anymore. I was talking to a spokesperson for whatever ideology she'd absorbed. That night, when she went to bed, I sat in the living room thinking about what had just happened. 4 years of marriage, and suddenly I'm the enemy not because of anything I'd done, but because of what I represented in her new worldview. Over the next few weeks, it got worse. She started analyzing everything I did through her new feminist lens. If I held the door open, I was performing benevolent sexism. If I paid for dinner, I was reinforcing economic dependency. If I complimented her appearance, I was objectifying her. The woman who used to love when I brought her flowers now lectured me about how gifts were transactional gestures designed to maintain power imbalances. The woman who used to curl up next to me on the couch now sat on the opposite end, explaining how physical affection was normalized coercion. I tried reasoning with her. I tried asking questions about her new beliefs. I tried understanding where this was coming from. But every conversation ended the same way, with her using academic jargon to explain why I was wrong and she was enlightened. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. I'd had a long day, and when I got home I reached over to give her a hug. She actually stepped back and said, "I need you to ask for consent before initiating physical contact." I stared at her. "I need to ask permission to hug my own wife?" It's about respecting boundaries and dismantling patriarchal assumptions about access to women's bodies. That's when I realized something important. She wasn't trying to improve our relationship. She was trying to destroy it in the name of ideology. And I was standing there letting her do it, trying to be understanding while she systematically dismantled everything we'd built together. "You know what?" I said, stepping back. "You're absolutely right." She looked surprised. "I am? Yes, you're completely right about patriarchal oppression, and I'm going to stop oppressing you immediately." She smiled, thinking she'd won some kind of victory. "I'm glad you're finally understanding." "I understand perfectly," I said. "From now on, I won't impose any patriarchal expectations on you at all. No more oppressive hugs, no more coercive compliments, no more problematic gestures of affection. You've opened my eyes to how terrible I've been." She nodded, still not catching the edge in my voice. "This is really progress." "It absolutely is," I agreed. "In fact, I'm going to be so respectful of your boundaries that I won't burden you with any of my patriarchal presence unless absolutely necessary." That night, I moved into the guest room, Not because I was hurt or angry, but because I was done playing game where I was automatically the villain. If she wanted to treat intimacy like oppression, then I was going to give her exactly what she asked for, complete freedom from my apparently oppressive presence. The next morning, she seemed confused when I didn't try to kiss her goodbye. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's perfect," I said. "I'm just respecting your boundaries. Have a great day." And that's how I decided to give my wife exactly what she claimed to want. A marriage completely free from patriarchal oppression. She was about to learn the difference between theory and reality. The next few days were educational, to say the least. My wife had gone from questioning our physical relationship to interrogating every aspect of our marriage, like she was conducting a sociology experiment. I'd wake up, get ready for work, and she'd be there with her morning lecture about how the division of household labor reinforced gendered expectations, never mind that we'd always split chores pretty evenly, or that I did most of the cooking because I actually enjoyed it. Now everything was evidence of systemic oppression. "The fact that you handle the finances is a classic example of economic control," she announced over breakfast, reading from one of her feminist theory books. I looked up from my coffee. "You asked me to handle the finances because you said math gave you anxiety. That's internalized misogyny," she replied without missing a beat. "Society conditioned me to believe I wasn't good with numbers. So, you want to take over the budget?" I asked. "It's not about what I want. It's about dismantling patriarchal structures." "Great. The checkbook's in the desk drawer. Have at it." She paused, clearly not expecting me to agree so readily. "Well, I don't have time right now to restructure our entire financial system." "Of course not," I said, getting up to leave for work. "But when you're ready to dismantle that particular structure, just let me know." This became the pattern. She'd identify some new form of oppression in our relationship. I'd agree completely and offer to change it immediately, and she'd backtrack with excuses about why now wasn't the right time for her liberation. When she complained that me driving most of the time was reinforcing masculine dominance over transportation, I handed her the keys and told her she could drive everywhere from now on. Suddenly she remembered that she didn't like driving in heavy traffic. When she said my tendency to choose restaurants was male decision-making privilege, I told her she could pick every place we went from now on. Then she got frustrated when I wouldn't offer suggestions because you were being passive-aggressive. The breaking point came when she started lecturing me about emotional labor. She'd joined this online group where women spent hours analyzing every interaction with their husbands like they were war crimes. She'd screenshot conversations and post them for other women to dissect, looking for hidden forms of oppression. "You asking me about my day is actually a form of emotional surveillance," she informed me one evening. I set down my fork. "So, asking how was your day is surveillance? It's a way of monitoring my activities and emotional state. It's a control mechanism disguised as caring. So you don't want me to ask about your day? I want you to recognize that the expectation of emotional sharing is a gendered burden placed on women." "Got it. No more questions about your day." She looked at me like I'd missed something. "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to examine why you feel entitled to access my emotional experience." I leaned back in my chair. "You know what? You're absolutely right. I have been way too entitled to your emotional experience. From now on, I'll keep my emotional surveillance to myself." "You're being sarcastic." "Not at all. I'm being respectful of your boundaries. You've made it clear that my interest in your daily life is a form of oppression, so I'm going to stop oppressing you." That night, when she tried to tell me about something that happened at work, I politely said, "I don't want to engage in emotional surveillance. You should share that with someone who won't use it as a control mechanism." She stared at me. "I want to share it with you. But I thought sharing emotional experiences was a gendered burden?" "It is, but what? Either it's oppression or it's not. You can't have it both ways." This was when I realized something crucial about her new ideology. It wasn't actually about creating a better relationship. It was about having a framework that made her right about everything and me wrong about everything. No matter what I did, it could be interpreted as oppression. If I was attentive, I was controlling. If I was distant, I was neglectful. If I was romantic, I was objectifying. If I wasn't romantic, I was taking her for granted. The game was rigged and I was done playing. I started treating our marriage like a business partnership, polite, professional, efficient. When she needed something, I'd handle it without emotion. When she wanted to discuss something, I'd listen without engaging. When she tried to start her feminist lectures, I'd nod and say, "That's an interesting perspective," before changing the subject. The shift was subtle but dramatic. I stopped trying to connect with her emotionally because she'd made it clear that my attempts at connection were forms of oppression. I stopped being affectionate because she'd told me physical affection was coercive. I stopped sharing my thoughts and feelings because she'd informed me that expecting emotional reciprocity was surveillance. Within a week, she was getting frustrated. "You're being weird," she said. "How so?" "You're just different, distant. I'm being respectful of your boundaries. Isn't that what you wanted? I wanted you to understand the dynamics of oppression in our relationship." "Do understand, and I've adjusted my behavior accordingly. You said intimacy was patriarchal oppression, so I stopped being intimate. You said emotional sharing was surveillance, so I stopped asking personal questions. You said physical affection was coercive, so I stopped being affectionate. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for." She looked confused. "But you're acting like we're strangers." "We're not strangers. We're partners in a marriage that you've redefined as a political battleground. I'm simply adapting to the new rules." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent the last 2 months explaining to me that everything I do as a husband is some form of oppression. So I stopped doing those things." Problem solved. She went quiet for a long moment. "You're punishing me." "I'm respecting your boundaries. You can't have it both ways. Either my behavior was oppressive and you're grateful that I've stopped, or it wasn't oppressive and you're upset that I've stopped. Which is it?" For the first time since this whole thing started, she didn't have an answer from her feminist theory playbook. She just stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time in months. "I think I need to call my group," she said finally. "Great idea. They'll probably have some insights about how my respectful distance is actually a new form of patriarchal control." The look on her face told me I'd hit the nail on the head. She was already planning to reframe my behavior as another form of oppression. But I didn't care anymore. I was done trying to be the good guy in a story where I was automatically the villain. If she wanted to live in a world where her husband was the enemy, then she could live in that world alone. The call with her feminist group lasted 3 hours. I could hear her voice through the guest room wall, explaining our situation to her online therapists who'd never met me but were apparently qualified to diagnose my patriarchal crimes. When she finally hung up, she came to find me. "We need to talk about what the group helped me understand. This emotional withdrawal is actually a form of punishment. It's called Stonewalling, and it's a classic abuse tactic." I looked up from my book. "So when you withdrew intimacy, that was liberation. When I withdraw intimacy, that's abuse. Do I have that right?" "It's different." "How?" "Because I was setting boundaries based on principle. You're withholding affection to manipulate me into compliance." The audacity was almost impressive. "Let me get this straight. You spent 2 months telling me that my affection was oppressive. Now you're upset that I'm not being oppressive anymore. You're twisting my words." "I'm using your exact words. You said physical intimacy was patriarchal oppression. You said emotional sharing was surveillance. You said romantic gestures were transactional manipulation. I listened to you, and I adjusted my behavior accordingly. Now you're calling that abuse." She had that look again, like she was searching through her mental handbook for the right response. "The group said that when men withdraw like this, it's because they're trying to punish women for asserting their independence. Your group of strangers on the internet knows more about my motivations than I do. They have experience with these patterns. What they have is a worldview that requires men to be villains. When I was affectionate, I was oppressive. When I'm not affectionate, I'm abusive. There's no scenario where I'm just a decent guy trying to make his wife happy." I closed my book and looked at her directly. "You know what? Your group is right about one thing. I am withdrawing, but not to punish you. I'm withdrawing because you've made it clear that my presence in your life is a form of oppression. So I'm doing you a favor." Over the next 2 weeks, I perfected the art of respectful distance. I was polite, but not warm, helpful, but not caring, present, but not engaged. I treated her like a roommate who happened to share my last name. When she cooked dinner, I thanked her politely and ate without trying to start conversation. When she asked about my day, I gave brief, factual responses. When she tried to discuss current events or share something funny she'd seen online, I nodded and said, "That's interesting," before returning to whatever I was doing. The change was driving her crazy. But every time she tried to complain about it, I'd remind her that I was simply respecting the boundaries she'd established. How could she argue with that? The real test came when her birthday approached. Normally, I'd spend weeks planning something special. Take the day off work, surprise her with breakfast in bed, maybe plan a weekend getaway. But all of that fell under the category of patriarchal gestures she'd spent so much time criticizing, so I didn't do anything. The morning of her birthday, I wished her a happy birthday, and went to work like any other day. No breakfast in bed, no flowers, no gift, no special dinner plans. When she asked if I had anything planned, I said, "I didn't want to impose any patriarchal expectations on your birthday celebration." She stood there in her pajamas, looking confused. "But it's my birthday." "Yes, and I'm sure you'll celebrate it however feels most authentic to you, without any pressure from me. I thought maybe we could do something together." "That sounds like you're asking me to plan something romantic, which you've explained is a form of transactional manipulation. I wouldn't want to oppress you on your birthday." The look on her face was priceless. She wanted to be angry, but she couldn't figure out how to be angry at me for giving her exactly what she'd asked for. That evening, she sat on the couch looking miserable while I read in the chair across the room. Finally, she spoke up. "This isn't what I wanted." "What did you want?" "I wanted you to understand the problematic dynamics in our relationship, not to become a completely different person." "I haven't become a different person. I've just stopped engaging in the behaviors you identified as oppressive." "But you stopped engaging in everything, because according to your analysis, everything I did was problematic. My affection was coercive, my romance was manipulative, my emotional investment was surveillance, my interest in your life was controlling. So I stopped doing all of it." She was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe you spent 2 months systematically deconstructing our entire relationship and explaining to me why every gesture of love was actually a form of oppression. Now you're surprised that I stopped making those gestures. I was trying to improve things." "No, you were trying to win. You wanted to be right about everything and make me wrong about everything. You wanted me to apologize for being a man who loved his wife. Well, congratulations. You won. I'm no longer a man who loves his wife. I'm just a man who shares living space with his wife." The silence stretched between us. I could see her processing what I'd said, trying to figure out how to respond. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "I don't want anything from you. That's the point. I've stopped wanting anything from you because you made it clear that my wanting anything from you was oppressive. So what now? Now you get to live in the world. You created a world where your husband doesn't burden you with his patriarchal affection or his oppressive romantic gestures. A world where you're completely free from the terrible experience of being loved by a man." She looked like she was about to cry, but I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not satisfaction, just a calm, clear understanding that she'd made her choice. And now she was living with the consequences. "I think I made a mistake," she whispered. "Did you? Or are you just unhappy with the results of getting exactly what you asked for?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, staring at the stranger she'd turned her husband into, finally understanding that sometimes you get exactly what you wish for. The admission that she'd made a mistake should have been a breakthrough moment. Instead, it marked the beginning of the most frustrating phase of this whole ordeal, because admitting she was wrong wasn't the same as actually changing her behavior. Over the next week, she started testing the waters, little attempts to gauge whether I was softening, whether my resolve was cracking. She'd brush against me in the kitchen, make subtle comments about missing how things used to be, or try to initiate conversations about our relationship. Each time I maintained my respectful distance. When she brushed against me, I'd step aside politely. When she made nostalgic comments, I'd nod and change the subject. When she tried to discuss our relationship, I'd remind her that I was simply respecting the boundaries she'd established. "You can't stay like this forever," she said one evening, clearly frustrated. "Like what?" "Cold, distant, like you don't even know me." "I'm not cold. I'm respectful. There's a difference. This isn't respect. This is punishment." I set down my coffee and looked at her. "You know what punishment would look like? Punishment would be me doing what you did to me. Punishment would be me analyzing everything you do through some ideology that makes you automatically wrong. Punishment would be me lecturing you about how your behavior is problematic while demanding you change to accommodate my worldview. I never did that. You spent 2 months doing exactly that. You took every gesture of affection I'd ever made and reframed it as oppression. You joined a group of strangers online who helped you dissect our marriage like it was a case study in patriarchal abuse. You made me the villain in my own love story. She looked uncomfortable. I was trying to grow. You were trying to win. And you did win. You successfully convinced me that my love was oppressive, so I stopped expressing it. Problem solved. But I don't want you to stop expressing it. Then you shouldn't have spent 2 months explaining to me why expressing it was wrong. This was the trap she'd created for herself. She wanted to go back to the way things were, but she couldn't actually admit that her entire feminist awakening had been misguided. She was stuck between wanting my affection and maintaining her ideological position that my affection was problematic. The solution she came up with was to try to have it both ways. She'd approach me with the vocabulary of her feminist theory, but with the expectation that I'd somehow translate that into normal human interaction. I think we should work on rebuilding our emotional intimacy in a way that honors both of our autonomy, she said one night. That sounds like a great project for you to work on. I mean, together. Why would I work on rebuilding something you spent so much time explaining was harmful? Because I want us to find a healthier dynamic. The dynamic we have now is perfectly healthy. You have complete autonomy. I make no demands on your time, attention, or affection. I don't impose any patriarchal expectations. You're free to live your life exactly as you choose without any input from me. That's not what I meant by autonomy. Then what did you mean? She paused, clearly struggling. I meant that we should both feel free to express our authentic selves without judgment. Great. I'm expressing my authentic self. My authentic self has learned that expressing love to you is considered oppression. So my authentic self has stopped doing it. You're being deliberately obtuse. I'm being deliberately consistent. You can't spend months teaching me that my behavior is wrong and then get upset when I change my behavior. The conversation went in circles like this for an hour. She wanted me to understand that her feminist awakening was still valid, but she also wanted me to go back to ignoring everything she'd learned from it. She wanted to keep her moral high ground while getting back the husband she'd driven away. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. When she tried to cuddle on the couch, I politely moved to the chair. When she suggested we watch a movie together, I'd say I had other plans. When she asked if I wanted to go out to dinner, I'd remind her that me choosing restaurants was an expression of male decision-making privilege. You're using my own words against me, she complained. I'm using your own wisdom to guide my behavior. Shouldn't you be proud that I've internalized your lessons so thoroughly? The breaking point came when she tried to initiate physical intimacy. I was reading in bed when she slipped under the covers next to me, wearing the nightgown she knew I found attractive. I miss you, she whispered, moving closer. I closed my book and looked at her. I thought intimacy was patriarchal oppression. I was wrong about that. Were you? Or are you just realizing that the ideology you embraced has consequences you don't like? Does it matter? It matters to me. Because if you were wrong about that, what else were you wrong about? Were you wrong about emotional sharing being surveillance? Were you wrong about romantic gestures being manipulation? Were you wrong about my affection being coercive? She didn't answer. See, here's the thing, I continued. You can't just pick and choose which parts of your enlightenment to keep based on what's convenient for you. Either your feminist analysis of our relationship was correct, in which case you should be grateful that I've stopped oppressing you, or it was incorrect, in which case you owe me an apology for 2 months of treating me like an enemy. I don't owe you anything. You're right, you don't. And I don't owe you anything either. I don't owe you affection, romance, emotional availability, or physical intimacy, especially not after you spent so much time explaining to me why those things were harmful. I got up and headed for the door. Where are you going? To the guest room. I wouldn't want to impose my patriarchal presence on your sleep space. As I walked down the hall, I could hear her crying. Part of me wanted to go back to comfort her, to fix this. But that part of me was exactly what she'd spent 2 months trying to destroy. She'd succeeded in killing the husband who would have moved heaven and earth to make her happy. What was left was a man who'd learned that sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing the game entirely. The crying went on for about an hour, then silence. Then, around 2 o'clock in the morning, she knocked on the guest room door. Can we talk? I opened the door. She stood there in her pajamas, eyes red and puffy, looking like she'd been through an emotional hurricane. I need to tell you something, she said. Okay. I hate what I've become. I hate what I've done to us. I hate that I took the best parts of our marriage and turned them into problems that needed solving. I waited. The group made everything sound so logical. They had explanations for every dynamic in our relationship, and all the explanations made you the bad guy. It felt powerful to have this framework that explained why I sometimes felt frustrated or restless. But I think I was just looking for someone to blame. For what? For being bored. For feeling like maybe I wasn't growing as a person. For wondering if there was something more exciting out there than what we had. Finally, some honesty. So instead of talking to me about feeling bored or restless, you decided that the problem was patriarchal oppression? It seemed easier than admitting I was being selfish and ungrateful. And now I realize that destroying something good doesn't make you a revolutionary. It just makes you someone who destroyed something good. She looked at me hopefully, waiting for some sign that this confession had changed things between us. I appreciate you telling me that, I said. But appreciation isn't the same as trust. What would it take for you to trust me again? I don't know if that's possible. You didn't just disagree with me about something. You systematically dismantled our entire relationship and convinced yourself that my love was a form of oppression. How do I trust someone who can reframe 4 years of marriage as abuse? I was confused. You were cruel. And the worst part is that you weren't just cruel to me. You were cruel to yourself. You took a man who adored you and turned him into someone who treats you like a stranger. I know. Do you? Because even now, you're not actually apologizing for what you did. You're explaining why you did it. You're asking for my understanding instead of taking responsibility. She was quiet for a long moment. You're right, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for treating you like an enemy. I'm sorry for making you feel like your love was unwanted. I'm sorry for choosing ideology over our marriage. Thank you. Does that change anything? It's a start. But apologies don't undo damage. They just acknowledge that damage was done. So what happens now? I looked at her standing there in our hallway, this woman I'd built a life with, who'd spent months tearing down everything we'd built together. Now you have to decide what you actually want. Do you want a marriage where your husband treats you like a beloved partner? Or do you want to live in a world where that treatment is considered oppression? Because you can't have both. I want my husband back. Your husband is gone. You killed him with your feminist theory and your online support group. What's left is a man who's learned that loving you is dangerous. That's not fair. Fair. You spent 2 months explaining to me why everything I did was wrong, and now you think it's unfair. That I learned the lesson you were teaching. She started crying again. But this time it felt different, not manipulative or self-pitying, just broken. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. Maybe you can't. Maybe some things can't be fixed. Maybe the best you can do is accept that choices have consequences, and you chose to prioritize being right over being happy. I turned to go back into the guest room. Wait, she said. What if I threw away all the books? What if I left the group? What if I never mentioned patriarchy or oppression again? I paused. Then you'd be someone who changes her deeply held beliefs whenever they become inconvenient. That's not better, that's just different. Then what do you want from me? I want you to mean it when you say you're sorry. I want you to understand that love isn't oppression, even when it's imperfect. I want you to choose our marriage over your ideology, but mostly, I want you to do it because you believe it, not because you miss the benefits of being loved. I do believe it. We'll see. I closed the door, leaving her standing in the hallway with the wreckage of everything she'd destroyed, finally understanding that getting exactly what you asked for isn't always what you want. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and breakfast, real breakfast, not the usual grab-and-go routine we'd fallen into. When I walked into the kitchen, she was standing at the stove, fully dressed, hair done, making pancakes. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning." I made breakfast. I thought maybe we could sit down and eat together like we used to. She winced. Like we used to before sitting down together became a patriarchal dinner table dynamic. I deserve that. Over the next week, she tried everything. She threw away the feminist books, left the online groups, stopped analyzing our relationship through ideological frameworks. She started initiating conversation, trying to rebuild the connection she'd systematically destroyed. But here's what she didn't understand. Trust isn't rebuilt through actions. It's rebuilt through time, and time doesn't move backward. I watched her efforts with the emotional detachment of someone observing a science experiment. She was trying to perform the role of loving wife. But performance isn't the same as authenticity. She was doing all the right things for all the wrong reasons. I deleted everything. She announced one evening all the groups, all the contacts, all the saved articles. "Trainee, I'm done with all of it." Why? Because I want to save our marriage. That's not a reason. That's a goal. Why do you want to save our marriage? She paused, clearly not expecting the question. Because the first, love you. Do you? Or do you love the idea of being married? Do you love me, or do you love the security and comfort I provide? I love you. Then why did you spend 2 months trying to convince me that my love was harmful? Because I was wrong. About what, specifically? She struggled with this. About everything. That's not good enough. If you can't articulate what you were wrong about, then you don't actually understand what you did wrong. This was the test, not whether she could apologize, but whether she could comprehend the depth of what she'd destroyed. I was wrong about your affection being oppressive, she said finally. I was wrong about romance being manipulative. I was wrong about viewing our relationship as a power struggle instead of a partnership. And I was wrong about prioritizing ideology over the man I married. Good. Now here's my question. How do I know you won't do it again? Because I've learned my lesson. Have you? Or have you just learned that this particular ideology has consequences you don't like? She was quiet for a long moment. What do you want me to say? I want you to understand that the problem wasn't the feminism. The problem was that you were willing to throw away our marriage for any ideology that made you feel superior. Today, it's feminist theory. Tomorrow, it might be something else. But the pattern is the same. You'll sacrifice our relationship to feel righteous about something. That's not fair, isn't it? You took 4 years of love and reframed it as oppression because some strangers on the internet told you that's what enlightened women do. You chose their validation over our marriage. What happens when you find the next group of people who make you feel special for rejecting something good in your life? She didn't have an answer. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to have to prove that you've changed not with words, but with time. Not with apologies, but with consistent behavior. And you're going to have to do it while understanding that I might never fully trust you again. How long? As long as it takes. Maybe months, maybe years, maybe forever. That's not fair either. You're right. It's not fair. It's not fair that I have to rebuild trust in my own wife. It's not fair that I have to wonder if the woman I married is going to wake up tomorrow and decide that something else about our relationship is problematic. It's not fair that I have to choose between loving you and protecting myself from you. She started crying again, but I didn't move to comfort her. That instinct had been trained out of me. I just want things to go back to normal, she whispered. Normal doesn't exist anymore. You made sure of that. We can build something new, but it'll never be what we had before. What if I can't prove myself to you? Then you'll have to live with the consequences of your choices. And if you can, then maybe we'll have a marriage worth saving. She looked at me across the kitchen table. This woman who'd been my partner, my best friend, my lover, and my adversary all in the span of a few months. I'm going to try, she said. Good, because I'm done trying. I'm done being the only one fighting for us. I'm done making excuses for behavior that nearly destroyed something I valued. From now on, you prove yourself to me, not the other way around. I stood up and started to leave. Where are you going? To live my life. With or without you. That's your choice to make. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, not the oppressor she'd made me out to be, not the doormat I'd almost become, but the man who knew his worth and wouldn't settle for less than he deserved. Whether she chose to meet that standard was up to her. But I was done lowering it to accommodate her confusion.